Section 39 of the Endeavour Journal of Sir Joseph Banks. Journal from 25 August 1768 to 12 July 1771 by Joseph Banks. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Recording by Gail Timmerman Vaughan. Section 39. June 1770. 1770, June 1. In the night it rained, and at times blew strong, not much to our satisfaction, who were in a situation not very desirable, as if our anchor should come home or cable break, we had nothing to expect but going ashore on some one or another of the shoals which lay around us. The night passed, however, without the least accident, and at daylight in the morn the anchor was got up and we proceeded, in hopes of getting out of our archipelago. By noon we got in with the mainland, which made hilly and barren. On it were some smokes. In the evening the weather settled fine, and we sailed along shore. At night came to an anchor. Tupaya complained this evening of swelled gums. He had, it seems, had his mouth sore for near a fortnight, but not knowing what cause it proceeded from, did not complain. The surgeon immediately put him upon taking extract of lemons in all his drink. 1770, June 2. Sailing along shore with fine weather, the country hilly and ill-wooded. Some islands were still in sight ahead of us. At noon the irregularity of the soundings made it necessary to send the boat ahead again. In the evening the country was moderately hilly, and seemed green and pleasant. One smoke was seen upon it. At night we anchored, several large islands being without us. 1770, June 3. At daybreak the anchor was weighed, and we stood along shore till we found ourselves in a bay, off the outermost point of which were the islands seen yesterday. By 8 it was resolved to stand out again, through a passage which was seen between them and the main, which was accordingly done. The country within the bay, especially on the innermost side, was well wooded, looked fertile and pleasant. After dinner, standing among islands which were very barren, rising high and steep from the sea. On one of these we saw with our glasses 2 men, a woman, and a small canoe fitted with an outrigger, which made us hope that the people were something improved, as their boat was far preferable to the bark canoes of Stingray's Bay. 1770, June 4. Hills in the morn were very high and steep, but soon fell into very low land, to all appearance barren. The water began now to be discoloured, and an appearance of islands was seen ahead, which made us look out for more shoals. At noon one smoke was seen behind some hills inland. At night we passed pretty near a headland, which appeared miserably rocky and barren. Much seaweed with very fine leaves passed by the ship all day. 1770, June 5. Land near the sea very low and flat, behind which the hills rose. In the country very little appearance of fertility, however, either on one or the other. At noon one large fire was seen. Several cuttlebones and 2 sea snakes swam past the ship. In the even the thermometer was at 74, and the air felt to us hotter than we have felt it on the coast before. Many clouds of a thin scum lay floating upon the water, the same as we have seen before off Rio de Janeiro. Some few flying fish also. 1770, June 6. Land made in barren rocky capes. One in particular, which we were abreast of in the morn, appeared much like Cape Roxant. At noon 3 fires upon it. Many cuttlebones, some seaweed, and 2 or 3 sea snakes were seen. In the even it fell quite calm, and I went out in the small boat and shot Nectris nugax, but saw nothing remarkable on the water. The weather most sultry hot in an open boat. 1770, June 7. Sailing between the main and islands, the main rose steep from the water, rocky and barren. Just about sunrise a shoal of fish about the size of, and much like flounders, but perfectly white, went by the ship. At noon the islands had mended their appearance, and people were seen upon them. The main as barren as ever, with several fires upon it, one vastly large. After dinner an appearance very much like cocoanut trees tempted us to hoist out a boat and go ashore, where we found our supposed cocoanut trees to be no more than bad cabbage trees. The country about them was very stony and barren, and it was almost dark when we got ashore. We made a shift, however, to gather 14 or 15 new plants, after which we repaired to our boats. But scarce were they put off from the shore when an Indian came very near it and shouted to us very loud. It was so dark that we could not see him. We, however, turned towards the shore by way of seeing what he wanted with us, but he, I suppose, ran away or hid himself immediately, for we could not get sight of him. 1770, June 8. still sailing between the main and islands. The former, rocky and high, looked rather less barren than usual, and by the number of fires seemed to be better peopled. In the morn we passed within 1/4 of a mile of a small islet or rock, on which we saw with our glasses about 30 men, women, and children, standing all together and looking attentively at us. The first people we have seen show any signs of curiosity at the sight of the ship. 1770 June 9. Country much the same as it was. Hills, near the sea high. Looked at distance not unlike moors or heaths in England, but when you came nearer them were covered with small trees. Some few flats and valleys looked tolerably fertile. At noon a fire and some people were seen. After dinner came to an anchor and went ashore, but saw no people. The country was hilly and very stony, affording nothing but fresh water, at least that we found, except a few plants that we had not before met with. At night our people caught a few small fish with their hooks and lines. 1770 June 10. Just without us, as we lay at an anchor, was a small sandy island, laying upon a large coral shoal, much resembling the low islands to the eastward of us, but the first of the kind we had met with in this part of the South Sea. Early in the morn we weighed and sailed, as usual, with a fine breeze along shore, the country hilly and stony. At nightfall rocks and shoals were seen ahead, on which the ship was put upon a wind off-shore. While we were at supper, she went over a bank of 7 or 8 fathom water, which she came upon very suddenly. This we concluded to be the tail of the shoals we had seen at sunset, and therefore went to bed in perfect security. But scarce were we warm in our beds, when we were called up with the alarming news of the ship being fast ashore upon a rock, which she in a few moments convinced us of by beating very violently against the rocks. Our situation became now greatly alarming. We had stood off shore 3 hours and a half with a pleasant breeze, so knew we could not be very near it. We were little less than certain that we were upon sunken coral rocks, the most dreadful of all others, on account of their sharp points and grinding quality, which cut through a ship's bottom almost immediately. The officers, however, behaved with inimitable coolness, void of all hurry and confusion. A boat was got out in which the master went, and after sounding round the ship, found that she had ran over a rock, and consequently had shoal water all around her. All this time she continued to beat very much, so that we could hardly keep our legs upon the quarter-deck. By the light of the moon, we could see her sheathing boards, etc., floating thick round her. About 12, her false keel came away. 1770 June 11. In the meantime all kind of preparations were making for carrying out anchors, but by reason of the time it took to hoist our boats, etc., the tide ebbed so much that we found it impossible to attempt to get her off till next high water, if she would hold together so long, and we now found, to add to our misfortune, that we had got ashore nearly at the top of high water, and as night tides generally rise higher than day ones, we had little hopes of getting off even then. For our comfort, however, the ship, as the tide ebbed, settled to the rocks, and did not beat near so much as she had done. A rock, however, under her starboard bow, kept grating her bottom, making a noise very plainly to be heard in the 4 storerooms. This we doubted not would make a hole in her bottom. We only hoped that it might not let in more water than we could clear with our pumps. In this situation day broke upon us, and showed us the land about 8 leagues off, as we judged. Nearer to that was no island or place on which we could set foot. It, however, brought with it a decrease of wind, and soon after that a flat calm, the most fortunate circumstance that could possibly attend people in our circumstances. The tide we found had fallen 2 feet, and still continued to fall. Anchors were, however, got out and laid ready for heaving as soon as the tide should rise, but to our great surprise we could not observe it to rise in the least. Orders were now given for lightening the ship, which was began by starting our water and pumping it up. The ballast was then got up and thrown overboard, as well as 6 of our guns, all that we had upon deck. All this time the seamen worked with surprising cheerfulness and alacrity. No grumbling or growling was to be heard throughout the ship. No, not even an oath, though the ship, in general, was as well furnished with them as most in His Majesty's service. About 1 the water was fallen so low that the pinnace touched ground as he lay under the ship's bows, ready to take in an anchor. After this the tide began to rise, and as it rose the ship worked violently upon the rocks, so that by 2 she began to make water, and increased very fast. At night the tide almost floated her, but she made water so fast that 3 pumps hard worked could but just keep her clear, and the fourth absolutely refused to deliver a drop of water. Now, in my own opinion, I entirely gave up the ship, and packing up what I thought I might save, prepared myself for the worst. The most critical part of our distress now approached. The ship was almost afloat, and everything ready to get her into deep water, but she leaked so fast that with all our pumps we could just keep her free. If, as was probable, she should make more water when hauled off, she must sink, and we well knew that our boats were not capable of carrying us all ashore, so that some, probably the most of us, must be drowned. A better fate, maybe, than those would have who should get ashore without arms to defend themselves from the Indians, or provide themselves with food, on a country where we had not the least reason to hope for subsistence, had they even every convenience to take with them, as nets, etc. So barren had we always found it. And had they even met with good usage from the natives, and food to support them, debarred from a hope of ever again seeing their native country, or conversing with any but the most uncivilized savages, perhaps, in the world. The dreadful time now approached, and the anxiety in everybody's countenance was visible enough. The capstan and windlass were manned, and they began to heave. Fear of death now stared us in the face. Hopes we had none but of being able to keep the ship afloat till we could run her ashore on some part of the main, where out of her materials we might build a vessel large enough to carry us to the East Indies. At 10 o'clock she floated, and was in a few minutes hauled into deep water, where to our great satisfaction she made no more water than she had done, which was indeed full as much as we could manage, though no one there was in the ship who willingly exerted his utmost strength. 1770, June 12. The people, who had been 24 hours at exceeding hard work, now began to flag. Myself, unused to labour, was much fatigued, and had laid down to take a little rest. Was awaked about 12 with the alarming news of the ship's having gained so much upon the pumps that she had 4 feet of water in her hold. Add to this that the wind blew off the land a regular land breeze, so that all hopes of running her ashore were totally cut off. This, however, acted upon every body like a charm. Rest was no more thought of, but the pumps went with unwearied vigour till the water was all out, which was done in a much shorter time than was expected, and upon examination it was found that she never had half so much water in her as was thought, the carpenter having made a mistake in sounding the pumps. We now began again to have some hopes, and to talk of getting the ship into some harbour, as we could spare hands from the pumps to get up our anchors. One bower, however, we cut away, but got the other and 3 small anchors far more valuable to us than the bowers, as we were obliged immediately to warp her to windward, that we might take advantage of the sea breeze to run inshore. One of our midshipmen now proposed an expedient which no one else in the ship had seen practised, though all had heard of it, by the name of fathering a ship, by the means of which, he said, he had come home from America in a ship which had made more water than we did. Nay, so sure was the master of that ship of his expedient, that he took her out of harbour knowing how much water she made, and trusting entirely to it. He was immediately set to work with 4 or 5 assistants to prepare his father, which he did thus. He took a low scudding sail, and having mixed together a large quantity of oakum, chopped fine, and wool, he sticked it down upon the sail as loosely as possible in small bundles, each about as big as his fist. These were ranged in rows 3 or 4 inches from each other. This was to be sunk under the ship, and the theory of it was this: wherever the leak was must be a great suction, which would probably catch hold of one or other of these lumps of oakum and wool, and drawing it in either partly or entirely, stop up the hole. While this work was going on, the water rather gained on those who were pumping, which made all hands impatient for the trial. In the afternoon the ship was got under way with a gentle breeze of wind, and stood in for the land. Soon after the father was finished, and applied by fastening ropes to each corner, then sinking the sail under the ship, and with these ropes drawing it as far backwards as we could. In about 1/2 an hour, to our great surprise, the ship was pumped dry, and upon letting the pump stand, she was found to make very little water. So much beyond our most sanguine expectations had this singular expedient succeeded. At night came to an anchor, the father still keeping her almost clear, so that we were in an instant raised from almost despondency to the greatest hopes. We were now almost too sanguine, talking of nothing but getting her into some harbour, where we might lay her ashore and repair her, or if we could not find such a place, we little doubted, to the East Indies. During the whole time of this distress, I must say, for the credit of our people, that I believe every man exerted his utmost for the preservation of the ship, contrary to what I have universally heard to be the behaviour of seamen, who have commonly, as soon as a ship is in a desperate situation, begun to plunder and refuse all command. This was no doubt owing entirely to the cool and steady conduct of the officers, who during the whole time never gave an order which did not show them to be perfectly composed and unmoved by the circumstances, howsoever dreadful they might appear. 1770, June 13. One pump, and that not half worked, kept the ship clear all night. In the morn we weighed with a very fine breeze of wind, and steered along shore among innumerable shoals, the boats keeping ahead, and examining every appearance of a harbour which presented itself. Nothing, however, was met with which would possibly suit our situation, bad as it was. So at night we came to an anchor. The pinnace, however, which had gone far ahead, was not returned, nor did she till 9 o'clock, when she reported that she had found just the place we wanted, in which the tide rose sufficiently, and there was every natural convenience that could be wished for, either laying the ship ashore or heaving her down. This was too much to be believed by our most sanguine wishes. We, however, hoped that the place might do for us, if not so much as we had been told, yet something to better our situation, as yet but precarious, having nothing but a lock of wool between us and destruction. 1770, June 14. Very fresh sea breeze. A boat was sent ahead to show us the way into the harbour, but by some mistake of signals we were obliged to come to an anchor again of the mouth of it, without going in, where it soon blew too fresh for us to weigh. We now began to consider our good fortune. Had it blown as fresh the day before yesterday, or before that, we could never have got off, but must inevitably have been dashed to pieces on the rocks. The captain and myself went ashore to view the harbour, and found it indeed beyond our most sanguine wishes. It was the mouth of a river, the entrance of which was, to be sure, narrow enough and shallow, but when once in, the ship might be moored afloat so near the shore that by a stage from her to it all her cargo might be got out, and in again in a very short time. In this same place she might be hove down with all ease, but the beach gave signs of the tides rising in the springs 6 or 7 feet, which was more than enough to do our business without that trouble. The meeting with so many natural advantages in a harbour so near us at the very time of our misfortune appeared almost providential. We had not in the voyage before seen a place so well suited for our purpose as this was, and certainly had no right to expect the tides to rise so high here that did not rise half so much at the place where we struck, only 8 leagues from this place. We therefore returned on board in high spirits, and raised the spirits of our friends on board as much as our own by bringing them the welcome news of approaching security. It blew, however, too fresh tonight for us to attempt to weigh the anchor. I even think as fresh as it has ever done since we have been put upon the coast. 1770, June 15. Blew all day as fresh as it did yesterday. We thought much of our good fortune in having fair weather upon the rocks, when upon the brink of such a gale. Our people were now, however, pretty well recovered from their fatigues, having had plenty of rest, as the ship, since she was fothered, had not made more water than one pump half worked will keep clear. At night we observed a fire ashore near where we were to lay, which made us hope that the necessary length of our stay would give us an opportunity of being acquainted with the Indians who made it. 1770, June 16. In the morn it was a little more moderate, and we attempted to weigh, but were soon obliged to veer away all that we had got, the wind freshening upon us so much. Fires were made upon the hills, and we saw 4 Indians through our glasses, who went away along shore. In going along which they made 2 more fires, for what purpose we could not guess. Tupaya, whose bad gums were very soon followed by livid spots on his legs, and every symptom of inveterate scurvy, notwithstanding acid bark and every medicine our surgeon could give him, now became extremely ill. Mr. Green the astronomer was also in a very poor way, which made everybody in the cabin very desirous of getting ashore, and impatient at our tedious delays. 1770, June 17. Weather a little less rough than it was. Weighed and brought the ship in, but in doing it ran her twice ashore by the narrowness of the channel. The second time she remained till the tide lifted her off. In the meantime, Dr. Sallender and myself began our plant gathering. In the evening the ship was moored within 20 feet of the shore, afloat, and before night much lumber was got out of her. 1770, June 18. A stage was built from the ship, which much facilitated our undertakings. Myself, walking in the country, saw old frames of Indian houses, and places where they had dressed shellfish in the same manner as the islanders, but no signs that they had been at the place for 6 months at least. The country in general was sandy between the hills, and barren, made walking very easy. Mosquitoes there were some, and but few, a good piece of fortune in a place where we were likely to remain some time. Tupaya, who had employed himself since we were here in angling, and had lived entirely on what he caught, was surprisingly recovered. Poor Mr. Green still very ill. Weather blowing hard with showers. Had we not got in yesterday, we certainly could not today. 1770 June 19. Went over the water today to spy the land, which there was sand hills. On them I saw some Indian houses, which seemed to have been inhabited since those on this side, though not very lately. There were vast flocks of pigeons and crows. Of the former, which were very beautiful, we shot several. The latter, exactly like those in England, were so shy that we could not come near them by any means. The inlet or river in which we lay ran very far into the country, keeping its course over flat land overgrown with mangroves. The country inland was, however, sufficiently hilly. Evening, hard rain. 1770 June 20. Weather cleared up, so we began to gather and dry plants, of which we had hopes of as many as we could muster during our stay. Observed that in many parts of the inlet were large quantities of pumice stones, which lay a good way above the high water mark, probably carried there by freshes or extraordinary tides, as they certainly came from the sea. Before night the ship was lightened, and we observed with great pleasure that the springs, which were now beginning to lift, rose as high as we could wish. 1770 June 21. Fine clear weather. Began today to lay plants in sand. By night the ship was quite clear, and in the night's tide, which we had constantly observed to be much higher than the day's, we hauled her ashore. 1770 June 22. In the morn I saw her leak, which was very large. In the middle was a hole, large enough to have sunk a ship with twice our pumps, but here Providence had most visibly worked in our favour, for it was in great measure plugged up by a stone, which was as big as a man's fist. Round the edges of this stone had all the water come in, which had so near overcome us, and here we found the wool and oakum or fothering, which had relieved us in so unexpected a manner. The effects of the coral rock upon her bottom is difficult to describe, but more to believe. It had cut through her plank and deep into one of her timbers, smoothing the gashes still before it, so that the hole might easily be imagined to be cut with an axe. Myself employed all day in laying in plants. The people who were sent to the other side of the water in order to shoot pigeons saw an animal as large as a greyhound, of a mouse colour, and very swift. They also saw many Indian houses and a brook of fresh water. 1770 June 23. The people who went over the river saw the animal again, and described him in much the same manner as yesterday. 1770 June 24. Gathering plants and hearing descriptions of the animal, which is now seen by everybody. A seaman who had been out in the woods brought home the description of an animal he had seen, composed in so seaman-like a style that I cannot help mentioning it. It was, says he, about as large and much like a 1-gallon keg, as black as the devil, and had 2 horns on its head. It went but slowly, but I dared not touch it. 1770 June 25. In gathering plants today, I myself had the good fortune to see the beast so much talked of, though but imperfectly. He was not only like a greyhound in size and running, but had a long tail, as long as any greyhound's. What to liken him to I could not tell. Nothing certainly that I have seen at all resembles him. 1770 June 26. Since the ship has been hauled ashore, the water that has come into her has of course all gone backwards, and my plants, which were for safety stowed in the bread room, were this day found under water. Nobody had warned me of this danger, which had never once entered into my head. The mischief was however now done, so I set to work to remedy it to the best of my power. The day was scarce long enough to get them all shifted, etc. Many were saved, but some entirely lost and spoiled. 1770 June 27. Some of the gentlemen who had been out in the woods yesterday brought home the leaves of a plant, which I took to be Arum esculentum, the same, I believe, as is called cocos in the West Indies. In consequence of this, I went to the place and found plenty. On trial, however, the roots were found to be too acrid to be eat. The leaves, however, when boiled, were little inferior to spinach. In the same place grew plenty of cabbage trees, a kind of wild plantain whose fruit was so full of stones that it was scarce eatable. Another fruit, about as large as a small golden pippin, but flatter, and of a deep purple colour. These were gathered off from the tree, were very hard and disagreeable, but after being kept a few days became soft, and tasted much like indifferent damsons. 1770, June 28. Tupaya, by roasting his cocoas very much in his oven, made them lose entirely their acridity. The roots were so small that we did not think them at all an object for the ship, so resolved to content ourselves with the greens, which are called in the West Indies Indian kale. I went with the seamen to show them the place, and they gathered a large quantity. Saw one tree, and only one, notched in the same manner as those at Botany Bay. We have, ever since we have been here, observed the nests of a kind of ants, much like the white ants in the East Indies, but to us perfectly harmless. They were always pyramidical, from a few inches to 6 feet in height, and very much resembling stones, which I have seen in English Druidical monuments. Today we met with a large number of them of all sizes, ranged in a small open place, which had a very pretty effect. Dr. Solander compared them to the rune stones on the plains of Uppsala in Sweden. Myself, to all the smaller Druidical monuments I had seen. 1770, June 29. One of our midshipmen, an American, who was out a-shooting today, saw a wolf, perfectly, he said, like those he had seen in America. He shot at it, but did not kill it. The seine was hauled today for the first time, and 150 pound of fish caught in it. 1770, June 30. The second lieutenant saw 2 animals like dogs, but smaller. They ran like hares, and were of a straw colour. Seine caught 213 pound of fish. End of section 39. June, 1770.